Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sex Sales Podcast, the podcast where we talk about culture, relationships, dating, even politics from a male and female perspective. Today, we are going to be talking about which relationship we should be prioritizing. So if there's a situation where there may be some conflict between your romantic partner, but also some conflict between your parents or your friends, who should we be prioritizing in that situation? How do we make that decision? And all the other implications or consequences that come with that. But before we get into that, just a bit of general chat. How you doing, Eliza?
Good. I feel like, I'm just thinking right now, it feels like I haven't seen you in so long. Like, has it been weeks or has time just been going so slowly?
I think it's been about 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow.
Because we recorded the last one with Matt.
Yeah, that was ages ago.
That was a while ago. Yeah, and then we took a week off. So Eliza was
dying.
ill, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you know what? I learned a good lesson because I don't know what I had, but my throat was like the most painful I've ever had. The back of my throat was bleeding. It was crazy. I couldn't talk, couldn't swallow. And I was trying really hard to like push through, and seeing a doctor on the Central Coast is like near impossible. So I just was like, whatever. I'll just like, it'll get better tomorrow. And I just kept getting worse. And I was like 10 days in and still dying. And I was like, I don't want to go on antibiotics because don't come at me, but like I'm not the biggest fan of taking antibiotics. I feel like it wrecks your gut. And when I'm breastfeeding as well, it feels like I'm not big on medication. Anyway, finally I went to the doctor and he gave me antibiotics. I was like, should I take it? And then I took it and like 6 hours later, I was fine. Like literally.
Wow.
The next morning I woke up and I was completely fine after like 2 tablets. I couldn't believe it.
Ooh, there you go.
Lesson learned. Just get on the antibiotics. I'm not fucking around again.
So you've changed your entire views about modern medicine based on how well it worked? Is that what you're saying?
I was just shocked. And my mum's really like anti everything like that. She kept being like, don't take those antibiotics. And it was getting in my head. This actually happened to me once when we were in New Zealand with my mum, and I was like a kid and I had an allergic reaction to like midges, those little like sandflies, and they bit everywhere all over my feet, and my feet were like tripled in size. I couldn't walk. It was agony, and my mum wouldn't take me to the doctors. She was like, just ride it out. And oh my God, they were in so much pain. And eventually my dad was like, fuck this. We had all these hikes planned and everything I couldn't go on. Everyone but me went. Then went to the doctors, went on antibiotics, and like literally within hours, my feet were back to their normal size and healed. And I was so mad. Like, I had to like endure the pain for this for like 5 days straight, not walking, when it was such a simple solution.
Wow. So
but yet, Eliza
has realized that antibiotics do work.
Yeah. Whoopsie.
Isn't it funny how the most hippie parents and the most traditional parents are kind of the same? They're like, just toughen up, you'll be right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
That's so funny. What's your policy with Remy? You're going to put him on antibiotics if he needs it?
I still don't really want to he's vaxxed for everything, and I'm very pro-vaccination. I'll say that. I think vaccinations are extremely important.
Okay, so it's just antibiotics.
It's just antibiotics.
You're pro-vax, take all the vaccines, just not antibiotics.
I don't know, like, do vaccines ruin your gut? Like, I feel like it's proven that
so
antibiotics
it's just the gut.
do. But like, when you think about it, it takes out like all your microbiome, and all your serotonin comes from your gut health. So I think it's very important. I don't know. I actually am not that researched in it. I think this is obviously just a message I've had my whole upbringing. And so I think that antibiotics are the devil. But now
the devil.
I will definitely just take them first day next time. Anyway.
Damn.
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm really good. We started the Brisbane show, Comedy Untamed. So if you live in Brisbane, we now have comedy shows there. You go ahead to comedyuntamed.com every Thursday night, and just been focusing on my comedy and the shows, and tour coming up relatively soon now. So neilcolhacker.com/tickets. Perth is nearly sold out already. That's the first show.
And your solo show?
Yeah, this is my solo show. The others are selling really well. So, yeah, things have been good. Things have been really good. The weather in Sydney has been quite nice for winter. It's sunny right now.
It's pouring up here.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. How about that? Wait, I own a question about your show.
Yeah.
How far in advance, like, do you set the date and start organizing your show before you do your comedy routine, or do you get your comedy routine literally down packed, memorized, and then start organizing your shows? And
No, it's a bit about when you know when the show date is, then you kind of start to finalize
Right.
the material.
yeah,
But you don't start with nothing. Some comedians are different, just depends.
yeah,
But I'm always just trying to come up with new jokes, and so when I have a show date, well, the first date of a tour, I know, okay, I have to have, at least 40 to 50 minutes worth of jokes by then.
that's crazy. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, tough life being writing jokes for a living and touring. It's so hard. Can we go? Wait, going back to the doctor thing.
Yeah.
I've seen a few TikToks and I've heard people saying this about GPs in Australia, but they really are losing trust, aren't they? Because there's been a few sketches about how GPs will just, whatever you say, they'll just be like, oh, yeah, you want some pills? Here, have some pills.
Literally.
Oh, you have anxiety? Here, take this medication.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here you go, have some antibiotics.
Yeah.
Because they're just trying to, because I got a few doctors in my family, when they work in a medical center, which a lot of them do now, there's much more incentive for them to just turn over as many patients as possible, because they just get a commission based on the patient load. Therefore, they try to speed through patients as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
just so they make as
Yeah.
much money as they can, which
It's so problematic, and because my mom was like, "Oh, I've gone into this doctor, I've spoken to them. They can book you in for 4 p.m. this afternoon." And I said, "Mom, I've already been there. First of all, please don't call and try and make appointments on my behalf. I'm 29. But secondly, I've already been there, and when you go in for your 4 p.m. appointment, every single time I've waited 2.5 hours, even with an appointment time. Like, it's just crazy, the wait times. But you know what I experienced this last time I went to the doctor recently, and it also happened to me a few years ago. Both times I was really sick, massive fevers, like coughing, sore throats, etc. And exact same scenario, different doctors, one in Sydney, one up here, that this has happened to me, where I've been wearing, a bra and a shirt, as you do, and when they lift up your back to take the your heartbeat or whatever, I don't know what they're doing, lift up my shirt, exposing my bra, the back of my bra, and both times my male doctors have mentioned, whilst they're looking at my bra at my back, "Are you due for a pap smear? Should we book you in?" And I just find that so weird and so icky, and I don't want to draw conclusions, but I was just like, I never get asked this with a female doctor, not once. It's just on my file when I be due for a pap smear. But I just find it so weird, like, you're looking at my bra, I'm sick and coughing everywhere, and now you think to ask, and I'm here because of my cold or flu, and you're asking me, should you come back in for a pap smear soon?
So both times they asked that question while your shirt was up.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I went home and I was like, how I told you this happened years ago? This literally exact same thing happened again in the exact same way with a different doctor at a different place. So fucked. I don't know. It's probably nothing. I'm probably looking into it, but I just think it's a bit of it's weird timing. Like, don't do it when someone's exposed to you. Do it when they're sitting down, but also I don't know why doctors are in, no other doctor I see is in the habit of asking me every single time I go in, when are you due for a pap smear? You only have to go once every 5 years. It's weird. Anyway, I don't want to draw conclusions.
Damn.
But
Well, I haven't been in that situation. I've never been asked when I'm due for a pap smear, but I will let you know if that does happen.
Hopefully you don't ever have to get one. What's
hopefully
the equivalent
not.
for you? A urethra?
I don't know, prostate check probably.
Yeah. Oh, that's not bad though.
I haven't had one of those.
You can do them yourself though. You only have to get you'd probably only have to get them if you find something sus, like you find, right?
A big lump.
Yeah, I don't actually know that if men just should get prostate checks. I mean, under the age of 40, I don't know if they should just get them on the regular, but I do hear that you should get, once you're above 40, you should check for those things if you're a man.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I probably should check for that I don't. But
Yeah.
yeah, Australian medical industry, hey?
Woohoo.
I'm a bit worried about it because obviously it's an aging population and people now have more medical needs than ever before.
Yeah.
So it's worrying
Yeah.
to think about what could happen, which is it could go broke, or they'll just have to reform it so that they privatize it. Who knows?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like whatever it's doing needs to be changed. But I don't know how. It just does.
Well, they should talk about preventative things more because a lot of people just don't know about the very simple health changes that will drastically prevent the likelihood that they'll need serious medical care. There's certain situations where we can't avoid it and it's just pure chance. And especially as we get older, there'll almost certainly be medical issues we deal with. But there's a few basic health concepts that a lot of people aren't aware of, or they don't necessarily partake in the required activities, and that would drastically decrease the incidence of people having serious medical ailments. But it's now gotten to a point where it's almost politically incorrect to say, hey, look, this is how you prioritize your health, and this is the diet you should be following, this is the exercise regime you could be following.
I always see the other side of that on TikTok, I guess, like because I'm on like progressive talk or something, and I always see plus size fat women saying every single time I go to the doctor for something, all it becomes about is my weight and you need to lose weight. And it's when you frame it like that, I'm like, well, it makes sense. Like this is what's going to be most better long term, blah, blah, blah. But then I also like when I watch these videos, I empathize so much because one was like, I went for like a splinter in my toe and the conclusion was I need to lose weight. And how like their health concerns get massively overlooked and everything just gets, minimized to, well, you're overweight. So sorry you're depressed, but you're overweight. Sorry you have a lump in your arm. It's because you're fat. So
the splinter seems a bit ridiculous if they're saying you need to lose weight for the splinter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird time that we're living in where I'm not a doctor, I'm not a health professional, but everyone in my family who is a doctor, there are a few doctors in my family. They definitely profess the importance of maintaining a healthy weight. It doesn't mean you have to be a model or a fitness guru, but there are a lot of downstream consequences of particularly obesity. I mean, if you're carrying a bit of extra body fat, I think that's probably not the end of the world. But what a weird time. I wonder what's gonna. And look, Lizzo now is in trouble because she fat shamed her dancers. So that's quite ironic. So
yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it is ironic because she's such an advocate as well. And I think in her like one of her responses, she was saying like, I've talked about my experience being fat shamed so much. So I don't know too much about it. I do remember seeing her response was really like, she didn't acknowledge anything or admit to anything. She denied everything. But it is a interesting situation. And it is a bit ironic. But be interesting to see what happens from there. And then she got the same lawyer as like Jonah Hill, and that always represents interesting.
The defamation lawyers in America.
Yes.
I mean, it's almost like there's so many jokes to write. I haven't even been able to write a joke. Because her whole brand is fat acceptance and body positivity, and then she's being accused of that very thing. I suppose in that situation, there'd be a higher threshold for what is considered bullying and what is considered fat shaming. And that's why I wonder if it's actually, I think I mentioned this a few podcasts ago. We'll get to the topic that we're talking about soon, but it's almost harder to live up to the standards that you set for yourself or that your tribe sets for you if you are in the progressive side of things as a celebrity, because then one little misdemeanor and then it comes out that you're a bully, that you are not living up to these standards that you profess to be in favor of. Whereas, I don't know, if you're not even right wing, but if you're just not a progressive advocate, you can kind of just have your flaws as a human being, and your audience might
And
not care
people
that
just
much.
expect it. I
Yeah, if
actually saw a
anything,
really good example. This was I thought was kind of sad. You'll hate this. I think it was Troy Sivan. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He's like a pop star kind of sing song. Oh my god, I
a
sounded so
sing
boomer
song.
the way I said pop star sing. You know what I mean? I'm sorry.
One of those pop stars, eh?
And he released a music video recently, and he had dances in it, and then he's getting totally ripped online everywhere to the point he had to make a statement apologizing because he didn't have any plus size people in his as dancers in his music video. So people were like, "There's not one single fat person in this video. Like, where's the inclusivity?" Blah blah blah. And he was like, "I just didn't think of it." Like, he was apologizing, but he was like, "I literally just didn't think." And I was like, God, imagine having to like, you have to check this list off. Okay, I need an Asian person, an Indian person, a black person. I need a fat person, a skinny person, like someone with, yeah, like in a wheelchair. It's just, I'm always, of course, the biggest advocate for inclusivity, but to the point where it's like you're making checklists to please everyone. Where's the creative art? Like, let him just pick dancers he thinks he's a good dancers. It's like, isn't it demeaning for those people to be like, you were picked because of this? I
Yeah,
don't know.
that's. I think that says more about the people getting mad about something like that. If
The
you're looking
hundreds of thousands
at
of
a
people
music
were.
video and
Yeah.
feeling like it's an assault on your autonomy or it's some kind of
Yeah.
personal attack, I think that's actually a call for you to pursue some self-reflection and look into why you're having a reaction like that.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of people just have learned, especially younger people, I guess, as well, in particular. But a lot of people just, with the new, I guess, the way we are in this day and age is that it's trendy to call people out and discuss and put your opinions out, which is great. Like you and I do that literally on our podcast. But it's to the point where it's like you don't have to search for flaws in every single avenue or every single creative project or anything, just everything in life that you look at. You don't have to find the flaws and point them out. There's going to be a million things that you and I say that aren't going to be 100% accurate or PC or whatever. And of course, we encourage people to educate or inform us or challenge that, whatever, that's fine. But when you're in the habit of like, okay, I'm not going to let any single thing slide, it's just like, is that, how does that make you feel? Like, do you have a really happy life if you're just finding the flaws in every single thing that you come across?
I
I
can't
don't know.
imagine you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as a transition into our topic, I wonder if it's a lack of healthy social relationships that are forcing people to try and control the external world around them that they use as a proxy for their social relationships. We're social creatures, and
Yeah.
as we're more atomized, talk about this on every podcast, but we probably react somewhat venomously towards things that we feel are a threat to our perceived kin or tribe, even if that tribe is not a physical tribe that we're surrounded by, but it's a sort of digital community that we're using as a proxy for our extended
Yeah.
family or something like that. And I wonder if there's something to be said there. I'm reading a book at the moment called Weird. It's all about, well, it stands for Western Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic.
Sounds like
And
such a Neil book.
yeah,
So
of
something
course.
you'd love to read.
Oh, yeah. Just as soon as it's all about how basically Protestantism and individualism and just the through line of just Western cultural ideals, how they've led to a very unique mix that we all exist in today, and has also been the cause of much of the West's economic success. But they draw correlations between the incidence of kinship and individualism, and also guilt versus shame. So cultures and countries that are more shame based as opposed to guilt based have stronger kinship networks, so stronger extended families, higher incidences of cousin marriages, which it's not a good thing, but that's just, it's actually quite bizarre how normal that is across the world. And also just, so East Asian cultures and other cultures that you wouldn't necessarily classify as weird tend to describe themselves based on their roles or as part of a community or a group or maybe their occupation, whereas people in weird countries will describe themselves based on maybe their dreams or their ambitions or who they are as an individual. And I find that really fascinating. I find that really interesting. And as there's actually more migration happening towards weird countries from cultures and countries that maybe don't have that similar weird ethos, I wonder how those cultural differences will manifest in the decades to come and what the political implications of those will be. If anything, we might be seeing those now. But I suppose that then brings us to what we were going to talk about, which is like, which relationship should we be prioritizing, or is there a hierarchy of sorts of what relationship we need to prioritize? And I think this is very cultural, but I suppose from a context of millennial, democratic, small L liberal, what do you think the primary relationship is, first of all, in your life, and what should it be for other people? I'm going to take a guess and say probably your relationship with your baby right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you have any different thoughts or ideas, let me know.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I mean, Remy aside, that's my baby. I would say I would prioritize your romantic relationship, not as this isn't advice, this is just what I do. And that to me is the most important relationship that I've prioritized in my life. Obviously, since having a child, I would literally do anything to put Remy above anyone or anything. So he comes first. I was talking about this with Adrian yesterday, actually, about how, remember that time we did a podcast? I don't know if I was pregnant or I just had Remy, but we were talking about ethics, and I was like, would you, if you had to choose between Andrea or your child and a bus full of children, who would you choose?
I'd kill the children.
And I was like, I'd save the children. And I was saying to Adrian, like, now that I've had a baby, I'm like, I would do so much. I would do literally anything, no matter how unethical, to save my baby. So it is funny how that changes when you've had one. But yeah, I would say that in my demographic, that your primary romantic relationship is probably prioritized the most. But then again, in just a few years younger, in early 20s, especially with boys or men, I find, or teenage boys as well, I find that they often, not always, but often prioritize their friend group as their primary source of support or joy, or put first. And I see it all the time on Reddit. Anytime a 20-year-old girl posts on Reddit, or a 19-year-old girl in the relationship subreddit, it's always like, he just wants to go out with the boys, he just wants to do this with the boys, and this and that, and I feel excluded, and how do I get him to pick me or prioritize me, which is really interesting how that kind of develops over the years and does change. And then, of course, like you said, there's cultural aspects where some people or many cultures prioritize family. And it's really interesting. Obviously, I'm just Caucasian, Australian, and my family is extremely important to me. But when I watch like 90 Day Fiancés, and there's one, he's called Sumit, I think, and he has an American wife, and he won't give her a ring, he won't propose, he won't marry her, he won't give her the visa because his family won't approve, and it's so frustrating. I'm like, she lives in India with him, and she has for years, where she has to leave the country every 60 days because he won't marry her, so she can't get the visa. And I'm like, why can't he just tell his parents, I'm marrying this woman? Like, it's so frustrating. That's my non-therapeutic brain talking, but it is really interesting. And people get so frustrated being like, I want you to prioritize this relationship that I do. So then it comes down to, well, do you pick someone that is going to prioritize the same relationships you? Like, is it going to be healthy or better if you're someone that prioritizes family above your romantic relationships? Should you be with someone that also does that, or would that create even more distance between the two and more disagreement? Is that better or worse? And also, like, it's not often a screening tool that people talk about in their relationships in the early days. Like, we often say, like, are you looking for something long term? Are you monogamous? Do you want kids? We cross those conversations, but I very rarely hear people asking which relationship is prioritized the most for you in your life. And I forgot to say as well, when we're talking about babies and children, I do feel like that I'm still only 11 months postpartum, and I'm very much in a baby bubble, and I wouldn't say like I'm going to put my kids before my relationship for the rest of my life or whatever. I do think that in a few years or in time that pendulum will swing back, and that I do think that it's actually more healthy to prioritize, or not necessarily prioritize, but at least have equal that relationship with your partner. So especially when it comes to decision making and child rearing and child raising, etc. So that's not necessarily my view, like kids come first, then partner. That's just something that I think is just going to swing both ways. But yeah, I do find it challenging. It's one of those things that I have really strong views on, that it's hard for me to, in a therapeutic sense, I actually would struggle to remain neutral when people are saying, oh, he or she prioritizes her friends massively before I do, because it's hard for me to understand. Well, I understand why, especially the cultural aspects, but it's hard for me to be like, I don't think you should. Like, that's one thing I find that I would probably have a little bit of bias on. And even the other day I saw this post on Reddit where a man said that he had a long-term partner or fiance or something. He'd been with this girl for years, and she had a gay male best friend, and they've been extremely close. The three of them hang out all the time. She always has this gay best friend constantly around. And then he went through a breakup, the gay best friend, so she invited him to live with them. And then she started basically never seeing her boyfriend. Her and the gay best friend went out for dinner. They'd go to the movies. They'd talk all the time. They'd be in the room with the door closed, hanging out. And then he confronted her, and she was like, he is my soulmate. Like, he's platonic, but that's my soulmate. Like, don't make me choose between the two of you.
Imagine
and
your
like,
romantic partner calling someone else
I
a
know.
soulmate.
And I was like, God,
Damn.
if this couple came to me as a client, I could not help but empathize with him. Like, that's so brutal. It's so rough. And it's so it's so common on both aspects. I feel like for boys and men, it's more common they have like the group of guys, and for women and girls, it's more common that they might have that one best friend, whether it be girl or gay best friend or male, whatever, that the priorities kind of get murky on who to prioritize. And also with women's, the one last point I'll make as well is that with women and girls and their best female friends, as the female friends, I do find that there's often a belief system that it's like our opinion on your relationship should hold an extreme amount of weight. So if we're telling you, you need to be with the girls more, you need to step aside from this man or whatever, you should be doing that. And feeling like they have more validity to intervene on a relationship. I do find that's a bit more common with women and girls.
I was going to say, yeah, in my experience, and I think in a lot of men's experience, they can get frustrated at how much input a partner's female friends will have on the issues in a relationship. I think I mentioned this on other podcasts where you've resolved a conflict or you've talked about a fight, but then your partner's opinion might change because she's gone and discussed that with her friends. And it just feels very disrespectful, because you think, okay, are you actually coming up with these decisions yourself, or are you just part of this hive mind? And I think that's a situation where I would lean towards prioritizing the romantic partner first. You should definitely get advice and input from your friends, but when it's to the point where you will overtly just discard your partner's opinion or the opinion that you as a couple came to prioritize the opinions or decisions of your friends, I think that's actually disrespectful to the romantic partner and to the
Yeah.
major romantic relationship in your life. Yeah, this is something that it differs from person to person, doesn't it? Because some people might even say, "I put God first. My relationship with the church, or
that's a good point.
my relationship with a higher being, that's number one." And they'll even say, "Yeah, that comes before any other relationship." So, if there's something that goes against my religious teachings that might actually be helpful to my partner, they'll still choose to pursue the path that is in alignment with their relationship with God, or even relationship with a community or a nation. I think today, people maybe in our demographic, in our age bracket, would generally put children first if they have that child. I think across the world, most people, if they're saying they're not putting their children first, eyebrows would be raised. But there may be situations where that is the case. But then, tell me what you think of this. I think a lot of people put their relationship with themselves high on that hierarchy of prioritization. So, you know how now there's a culture of self-care where, oh, look, I might want to hang out with my friends. I might want to do this extra work, but I got to prioritize myself. In a way, that's prioritizing the relationship you have with yourself before some of these other kinship networks. And from what I've read, I definitely, there's situations where I do that, and I think it's important to do that when it's vital. But from what I've read, if we're talking about long-term mental stability and contentment and happiness, that comes from your social network. And sometimes there's a responsibility to put that social network above the self. So obviously, if it's a family and you're tired or you feel like you could do with a few days off, but there's something important that needs to be done for the family, whether it's an event or if it's children, obviously you got to then prioritize them. But maybe even if it is a friendship group and a friend is going through a hard time and a time much more challenging than whatever you're enduring, I would say if you can, you should probably prioritize caring for that friend, because in the long term, that's going to serve you better than just taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Again, very contextual, but I do believe that's important sometimes to put our social relationships above our more individualistic concerns.
It's a really good point, actually, because when you're talking about that, I think so much of Adrian, and he's so introverted and he always prioritizes how he feels on the day. So if we plan something social, he's like, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to go. And he's just like, that's it. He's fine with that. But he does it like every time. And I was talking about this with him yesterday. Actually, we had his mother-in-law come babysit for like the whole day. So it was like our first time spending 6 hours just without a baby. And he was talking about what his speech that he wants to do for our wedding or his vows, and he doesn't know anything, blah, 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 about them, but how we've helped each other grow and challenge each other. And I was saying, if it weren't for me, not to say like toot my own horn, but if it weren't for me, he'd be so unhealthily recluse. Like I tell him, okay, it's been a few months or it's been a couple months or a few weeks, whatever. You need to touch base with your friends and organize something. Like, here's a weekend you're free. Here's a day we've got nothing on. You need to organize something so that he does it. Or I plan things. I message his friends, come up and see us. Here's a weekend. And they message me. And I just think, God, like, if you were single and not living with your friends anymore, who would you see? What would you do? Like, don't you think to prioritize that? It's so important for your mental health. And when he's out with his friends, he's super social, super funny, outgoing, and he has the best time. He's always glad he does it. It's just on the day, he's like, oh, I just want to chill at home and watch Lord of the Rings or whatever, watch the game that's on. So I think that's a really good point, that we do tend to, not even just in that aspect, but prioritizing ourselves completely separate to that, but saying like, okay, you need to meet me where I'm at, which is great. It's important to have boundaries and self-care, know your worth, blah, blah, blah. But when you're constantly expecting the person you're in a relationship with or your friends to mold themselves or adapt or change into a way that suits you better, it's still not really serving the overall purpose of fluidity and fairness and equality within those relationships. And I do think that that is a new trend where we've swung too far from one way, being too selfless, like I'll do anything, and burning yourself out, helping out your relationship or your friends, to now often going too far the other way, where it's like, you're not doing exactly as I prefer. I have an issue with this. And then on the last point though, I will say, like with friends and family, obviously there are some very toxic relationships, toxic families, and I don't think that those people should put those feelings aside. If you've experienced any kind of, abuse or whatever, I don't think you should put those feelings aside for the sake of connection with your family. If you need to have that distance, I do think that if that's a decision you make, that's a safe and sound and fair decision. And you can choose your family as long as there is a community around you that you can go to. I think it's essential that there is at least a community. It doesn't have to be your biological family or whatever. But yeah, that's a good point.
I also think one of the most prominent relationships that has been degraded in Western countries over the last couple of decades has been the relationship with the community, with the local community, and with a sense of civic duty towards that community. So my parents, or most of my grandparents, would tell me stories about how when they moved to Australia in the 60s, everyone on the street knew each other, and they were always willing to help each other out, and they all acted as a large friend group essentially. And this is to say, look, I'm not a paragon of virtue in this situation either. I don't know hardly any of my neighbors because first of all, there's such a high turnover rate in a dystopian apartment block in Sydney here, but I just haven't made the biggest effort to get to know my neighbors, so that's on me as well. I'm friendly with some of them. There was one that used to live next to me that I was very close with, and I think we'd even had drinks once or twice and gave each other Christmas presents. But that was it. Well, actually, they were really helpful. Once they fed my cat when I wasn't here. I don't think I ever did it. Well, they never asked me to do anything, and I would have done it. But there's a few. But now I don't even know who the neighbors are, and a lot of them don't even speak English, so that doesn't help. So the relationship with the community has degraded. There's a book I need to read called Bowling Alone, which apparently tracks that across the second half of the 20th century in America, which is would I'd assume be relatively similar to Sydney. I went in the Central Coast. That's more of a suburban, classic Australian, middle class lifestyle there. So I'd imagine there'd be closer community ties. This could be a very Sydney specific issue, particularly in this like built up Sydney Blade Runner dystopia that I'm living in.
Also age dependent. Like I know like my parents live on the Central Coast, and within like months they have massive communities. My mum knows literally every single person everywhere. She organizes all these social events. My dad organizes all the blues music events on the Central Coast. Like he has a band. He does all these things every weekend. They know so many people. They have such a community. Every time I cross someone on the beach, if I'm at like the beach where they live at, they're like, oh, are you Tanya's daughter? Oh, this like those Tanya dogs. They just know. Whereas me, I remember when I moved up here, I was living in Crow's Nest in Sydney in an apartment, and since I moved out of home when I was 18, and I had only lived in apartments never knowing my neighbors or anything like that. And I was so excited when we bought this house, and I was like, oh, are our neighbors going to like bring us muffins or something? Like, what happens when you move into a house? Well, I'm so excited. And then when I moved in, and my next door neighbor, she got pregnant, and her kid's 6 months older than Remy. So when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. Our kids are going to grow up like best friends. We've never spoken, not once.
Really?
We wave sometimes, or if my dog escapes or her dog escapes, she'll let me know.
Why don't you go and, I don't know, give them a bottle of wine or something and just...
I feel like it's too late now. We're like 2 years in.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's so, I just was like thinking, okay, and when we bought the house and I met the owners, they had, there's someone in the house behind us, and he's like a really old man, and they had a little pathway from the back gate down to the front of our house, and they called it like so-and-so's path, and that was his name. And she said, we're really close with him. Like, we hope you keep that relationship. And he crosses through our house to get to the front, like, road. Otherwise, It's really hard for him. And I was like, oh, my God, of course he can. And he was so cute, and he's so old. Never spoken to him. I've tried. And I was like, we're not annoying people. Like, I mean, they wouldn't know if we were, but we're not like annoying in the sense that we have parties, making music or noise or anything like that, aside from a crying baby. But yeah, it's sad. And my mum was like, you need to just go hang out at local cafes. And I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Like, that's
some of the advice that older generations give, it just wouldn't work now.
Yeah, it's great. If it weren't for my mother's group, or if it weren't for having a baby, I would have no community up here. And it's crazy, like, now obviously that I've got a mother's group, but when I just take Remy to play centers, like indoor playgrounds, I'm always meeting parents, mums, talking to them, but we're never getting to the point of like, oh God, my dog's
That's
barking.
right.
Sorry, Nelly, shush. Apologies.
Oh, wow, that worked.
Yeah, she's
very well
she's
behaved.
responsive in that sense. But we're never getting to the point where I'm like, it almost feels like I feel like I'm a guy asking out a girl, like, can I have your number? Like, we should hang out again. And it's funny though, because so many of the mums I meet are from Sydney. So I'm like,
Do
I
they
doubt
ever
they
reject
have.
you? Are they like, you're really nice, but no?
I don't, no, like, I can't do it. I'm like, I know that I'm a really social person. So I find that I probably am making conversation and chit chatting to them. And I'm like, well, maybe they don't want that. Like, who knows? It's funny how it's like making friends as an adult is so different. Obviously, I still have all my friends down in Sydney that I go and see, and they come and see me, which is great. But I'd love to just be like, especially now I'm not working, be able to call people up. I've got, Ali, who also has a baby, but be able to call people up and be like, hey, it's Tuesday, let's hang out.
Yeah, everyone needs a village.
Yeah.
It takes a village to raise a child. So
yeah, so I do think it's easier on the Central Coast, but I think it's easier for older people.
Is it, or is it that we just are too anxious? We just don't trust each other? Because it doesn't sound that hard to just go and join the clubs and things. I'm very lucky in that most of my community would be from work, and I have a really strong, close group of people that I work with that I'm also friends with, which can actually be difficult in the work environment. But all things considered, it's still it's a better atmosphere, and it incentivizes you to, in fact, work harder, and there's a greater purpose than just maximizing the revenue. It's about generating goodwill and building an institution and lifting your friends and your compatriots up, which is far more meaningful. So a lot of adults now would classify their career group as almost a kinship network.
Yeah.
I know some workplaces go way too far with that and create all these cringy work functions where they talk about how they're family and we're not a business, we're a family, all that kind of crap. But at the same time, most of the people my age now, I'd say definitely spend most time with people they work with and are quite close with the people they work with. They can gossip with them. They can talk about the larger organization or what needs to be done. They go to events with them. They go to retreats with them. So that seems to be where a lot of people generate their an important relationship for them. And in some situations, they prioritize that relationship over their romantic partner.
Yeah,
And it might be they might
100%.
not have a choice, or they might, implicitly they may not, they may be coerced to do that. But that's also been a big change. The encroachment of work into every area of our lives, and then technology has enabled that as well. Now, for me, I'm very lucky. I'm in a good position where I just really enjoy the people I work with, and we've been able to build something where we can all be friends and be friendly with each other and build something meaningful and also work together. But for a lot of people in corporate work, there's a sort of false sense of community that comes with a lot of the team bonding exercises and things,
Yeah.
but it's actually quite shallow, and it doesn't provide the same source of meaning that a local community or even a religious network or an extended family would.
Yeah, yeah. It's and also like another aspect as well, which I was talking to my friend about this the other day, that she went into a new job at she was a she worked as like a therapeutic worker, and then she was took another job as a manager for a team with therapeutic workers, which was basically the same job I had. And but because she started a new organization, I asked her the other day, I was like, do you have friends there? And she was like, it's so hard coming into a new job where I don't know anyone because I'm their boss. Like, what are the boundaries and ethical aspects do you have to have around that? Because she was like, I really like them all, but it's a very like straight edge job. It's not like you're, in comedy or tradie or any of those things where you can have those types of relationships. She's like, I have to really maintain. She has to provide supervision as well, which is basically like therapy for her workers. So having that banter type friendship and relationship blurs that as well a little bit. And as being, when you do supervision as well, part of that is you have to communicate issues you've seen or areas of development and provide sometimes criticism. So to do that then to your friends, it's such a hard line to bear. I know that I really struggle with that in my job because I worked my way up within the same organization. So I was once a fellow colleague and then all of a sudden I was their boss. And I was like, oh, sorry. It was awkward. But yeah, that's a whole other dynamic as well, which is hard. But it is interesting and definitely true that how much our co-worker relationships are essential. And I do recommend for people to find a workplace where you can find people that are similar in interest, bond with them, or similar in age, etc. Working from home obviously is another big thing that's come up, where people no longer have that social aspect. And I saw this this girl on TikTok talking about what her workplace does. Do you know the website Habbo Hotel?
Yeah.
It's like a chat room where you make like a room and you go and chat to people, blah, blah, blah. Where basically there's a new app. I can't remember the name of it, I'm sorry. But they've made an office layout. It's not Habbo Hotel, by the way. That's just my reference point. They've made an office layout as like an animated room, and they've all got their own little offices, and it's online on your computer, and they've decorated their own offices, and they've got their little characters. And so she says, when I'm in my virtual office, I close the door, but I leave the door open, and then if someone wants to chat to me, their virtual character will walk from the main room or whatever out into their office and will type to them, so you can call, chat, message, whatever. And she's like, instead of setting up Zoom calls, we just walk into each other's virtual offices, say, are you free or whatever, and send a message. And it's just like, it was blowing my mind. I was like, is this going to be the new thing? I couldn't believe it. And it was really cute to look at. I was like, oh, this is aesthetically, it's like Sims, but like, what the fuck? It's so scary. Oh, crazy.
Ugh.
Yeah.
That's virtual office gossip. Do they talk at the water cooler? What do they do?
I don't know. And it's like, can everyone see like your conversations as you're having chit chat? Or is it
Yeah.
like once you're in their office, only you two can see it? I don't know. It's fascinating,
And
but
what's HR going to do if everyone works from home? Are they going
yeah.
to figure out you? Are they going to look at your Google history and talk about how that's harming employee culture?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, the way workplaces are changing, and then AI, that's going to change everything as well. The next 10 years, very interesting in the I guess the work front. Um, some okay, what would you say to a situation where a friend was in need and you felt it was your duty to aid them in any way you can, but it was getting to a point where your romantic partner felt like it crossed a line where you're letting them stay with you, but they are potentially not in the best place, and they have a negative presence, or you've had
Yeah.
to go back on some dates or some other plans that you had with your romantic partner. You think it's to help the friend. What would you say to a situation like that?
When I
I
was in my early 20s, I did this all the time. What were you going to
Okay.
say?
I was just going to say, I think you got to prioritize the romantic partner in that
Yeah.
situation, but it's contextual.
Yeah, it's almost like at this point in my life, 1,000%, I would prioritize this, especially knowing the partner I'm with, Adrian. He wouldn't just call out someone saying this is impacting our relationship unless it truly was. But when I was in my early 20s, I was always taking people under my wing, always offering them a place to stay, always trying to like save everyone. And it was problematic. And I think I talked about this recently on a podcast, but when we were talking about, how basically, anyway, we were talking about a guy I used to be friends with. I worked with him. I was friends with him. He was a little bit younger than me. He had a lot of issues. He was abused at his home. I was 19 at the time, or 20, and he was 19 or 18. I don't know. And he started leaning on me for support. So I was always offering, and I had a boyfriend at the time. I was always offering him like meals, money, support, answering his phone calls, driving him places if he needed. And he then showed up one time at my apartment in the middle of the night where my boyfriend was living with me, and he had like a black eye, and then he was like, I have nowhere to stay. Of course he can stay here. And then it was after that, he was sleeping in his car, and I dropped down pillows and blankets, and then my boyfriend was like, okay, this is like, this guy's obsessed with you. And I was like, he's not obsessed with me. He doesn't have anyone. Anyway, my boyfriend was right. Like a month later, he was crossing all these boundaries and was trying to get in my pants. And I was like so heartbroken, being like, I thought we were friends, and taken advantage of. And that happened way too many times to count. But even obviously, I wasn't just saving or trying to like do that with men. It was literally any time someone told me I'm going through something, I could not say no. And it took a lot of practice, and even actually my own supervision through my work. And that's when I started working in this industry at like 20. I really learned a lot about by enabling this kind of stuff, I'm doing them a disservice, and I need to, in order to help them, I also need to prioritize myself and my own boundaries. So I had one friend who I had at some points also let live with me when he needed it, and he would constantly
You let everyone live with you.
you wouldn't believe how many people, I would say at least I've lived with at least like 30 people over the space of 10 years.
Wow. 30.
Yeah. And probably more, maybe 50-50 in gender, or maybe a bit more skewed towards males. But yeah, it's always an open house. Like I always said to Adrian, like if Remy ever has friends that like need to live somewhere or stay somewhere, they could just live with us. Like it would be a free for all home. And he's like, okay, we'll see. But yeah, I had another friend. I'd opened my home to him many, many times, and obviously, he was going through something, and he also had suicidal thoughts and ideations, and I was always on crisis management, supporting him through that, talking him out of anything, intervening, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually, after like a year of it happening, I started to learn like, okay, I'm not actually helping people here. I'm being a bit of a pushover, and two, I'm just like giving everyone everything. So every time he became borderline, this was another person that kind of became a little bit manipulative as well, and just expecting me to drop everything at any point. So when he started talking about self-harm or suicidal thoughts, I would call an ambulance and send it to him every single time. And I would send along with that, I'd let him know that I've done this. I'd send the number for Lifeline. I'd send an important message, but I was like, I can't come out 3 times a week to see you anymore. I just can't do it, and putting those boundaries in. And then it's something that I realized, like, every relationship going forward, I have to amend my approach to them. And just like even simple things, like I've always been an extremely physically affectionate person. And in my 20s, I would meet people, like mainly girls, I'd hold their hands, always link arms with them, very cuddly, very much arms, hands always on. This is what I love about having a baby, being clingy as well. Is like I get all my like affectionate needs met. And then I really had to teach myself, even just friends that I would find like platonic, if I find something funny, I'm always like, or even acquaintances or colleagues, always grabbing their arms, saying that's hilarious or whatever, or patting them on the back. How you going? How's work? And then I thought, God, if I was like a 50-year-old man, this is like fucking creepy behavior. It's just accepted because I was a girl in my early 20s, but I had to adapt going forward. Okay, I need to stop like smothering people with affection, because it could potentially make people uncomfortable. So it's one of those things that I think some people are going to be like me and be naturally inclined to want to, if they see someone in need and they want to be like, okay, now you're not, you're going through something, this is now my thing to fix. And that was my problem. And I do think it is an extremely harmful belief system to have about yourself and about others. Like, I needed to really learn, like, this person can survive or manage without me, and if they can't, the best thing I can do to help them is increase their own support network, whether that be through supporting them finding psychiatric care, reaching out to their family or loved ones, doing that rather than just taking them under my wing and being like, I'll fix everything. So I've definitely been on that side of those things. I'm definitely no longer on that side of things.
Isn't that really tragic and terrifying, the amount of people and anecdotes that I've heard of people who might be suicidal and threatening suicide, and then it's been some kind of unconscious manipulation tactic to test whether that person really cares about them.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of those stories, and it's sad now, because then if someone were to say that to me now, my immediate thought would be, all right, are you actually suicidal?
Yeah. Yeah, it is sad, and it's so common. I remember years ago I spoke to my dad about this, and he said the same thing happened to him with a girl, and he just said to me, then let them. I was like, okay, that's a bit fucked up.
It's the only, like, at this point, it's like, it's a pretty tragic and hard thing to say, but...
Yeah, that's why if it happens and it's like an ongoing thing, and it's not, and and you feel that it's becoming toxic or it's unhealthy, or obviously anytime someone, it's almost like similar to saying, I've experienced sexual assault. Some people question that, and you just shouldn't. You should just believe someone and take them at face value, but it also doesn't mean that it's your issue to resolve or something that you need to involve yourself in, and you just put them in support. So anytime someone talks about suicide, even if it were my best, closest friend who has never like taken advantage of my support or needed me, I would immediately, if there was a threat to their life or they're saying there's a threat to their life, immediately send an ambulance there, because they're either going to, one, get the support that they need, or two, if that were inauthentic and hypothetically manipulative or whatever, then they're getting called on their bluff. But I think
they
that
get the bill and they won't do it again.
Yeah, I think it's really it's a huge thing to have or plan or enact suicidal thoughts. But that being said, there is a difference to to someone saying, I'm going to harm myself now unless you come and see me, to someone saying, I experience suicidal ideation. Because often people that have experienced or do experience suicidal ideation or thoughts of self-harm, they've had that for 5-10 years. So when you when you hear that, you might not necessarily have to just immediately call an ambulance, because they might just be opening up or expressing something about themselves, or this is something that they've lived with their whole life, or they've got depression, etc. And in that case, it's up to you about, okay, am I going to engage in this conversation? Like, do I have the capacity, like the emotional and mental capacity to engage in a conversation like that? Or if not, can I inform them? Like, I can't be this person to support you through this. Thank you for telling me. I wish I can help you, but I can't support you through this. Is there anyone else you can call or I can contact for you? But yeah, it is a tricky one. And the one thing I know, like when I actually worked or volunteered for Lifeline for many years as a suicide hotline counsellor, and you get obviously thousands of calls a day of people saying that they feel suicidal, but that was never considered a risk until we would always ask, do you have a plan? And how long can you stay safe for? So sometimes they'd be like, most of the time they have the thoughts and there's no plan in place. And when there's a plan in place, it becomes different. They might have a method in mind. So let's say it's pills. Like, then do you have the pills? How many do you have? How long can you stay safe until you're going to reach that? Is it 3 days? Is it an hour? And what can we put in the meantime? And that's like the model of the intervention, basically. So that's just my advice. Like, obviously, if someone's manipulating you, you can call them out, call their bluffs, send an ambulance to them. But if people are just opening up about their own mental health struggles and saying this is just something that I've lived with or I experience, it does seem a little bit cruel to be like, ambulance coming your way. So I just want to clarify the difference between those scenarios. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
did that feel clarified?
That makes that definitely makes sense. To conclude this one, maybe. Well, I think we didn't touch on family as much as we could have. So that's a big cultural difference. I mean, there's a running joke between people who aren't white always talking about how white people don't care about their family. And how, my mom said this, I'm going to cut her off. And like, there's not even a thought that comes to your mind.
She's dead to me.
Yeah, and almost every other culture, that just, you cannot, the level of shame that you'd experience if you did something like that. Maybe it's because the West has been so economically prosperous that it has enabled individualism to occur in a way that it just hasn't been able to occur in other countries because the economic conditions are far harsher. So you need to rely on a kinship network. But that does seem to be changing in developing countries. So I wonder how family structures and cultures around which relationship to prioritize will change over the coming years. And
yeah, it's really interesting because I always wonder this as well. Like, there's so many different theories or possibilities. Like, is it that you're growing up being taught like your family needs to be prioritized? Is it the cultural norm? Like, once you're working, you need to financially support or whatever, look after your family, or they live with you, which is a thing in many countries. Or is it even something more deeper than that? Like, for example, I was talking yesterday with my mother-in-law. She's a daycare worker, and she was talking about how she's been like researching and studying the impact of kids in long-term daycare and their relationship and attachment to their primary caregivers or their parents if they're in daycare full-time, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. How does that impact, your long-term views on your family or your attachment? All these things and that's a very westernized thing. Daycare is completely the norm. Every time I'm like, I'm still at home. I'm not even Remy's not even a year old. And everyone's like, you're still at home? Like, every single day, people are so shocked I'm not working yet. It's so interesting.
It's going to be very interesting how that generation changes mentally and psychologically due to being in daycare for a much longer period of their life. Because even when I was a kid, most of my friends' mothers were stay-at-home mums.
Yeah.
I
Same.
think it was still, and this was in the 90s, I think it was still relatively abnormal at that age, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, to have two working parents. I think when I got to high school, there were more working parents, but it's going to be very interesting to see what the kinship and psychological ramifications are going to
Yeah.
be. I really wonder. But I was going to say something and I forgot. What was I going to say? We were talking about family, and all right, we'll come back to if I remember.
Yeah, come back to it, but I do
Always.
feel like it's people that have to prioritize, not have to prioritize, but are just brought up prioritizing family. And I've someone that has dated,
Oh
like I've
yeah,
talked about dating Greek boyfriends, and I would always like be like, oh my God, why do we have to see your family every single weekend? Like, can't we just do something ourselves, or them having important input into our relationships, etc.? It's something that I struggled with so drastically but is so normal in so many cultures, and it's expected almost. Like, you need your parents' approval, you need their input, you go to them for advice. That's something I would never do. But
most
maybe
people
occasionally.
across the world, and it seems to be getting to this point here because real estate is so expensive, they're living in multi-generational households. So I know in
Yeah.
Italy and Japan, they'll
Yeah.
often take out multiple stories of the house, and each successive generation, usually it's a sort of patriarchal lineage, that they'll then take the next floor of the house. I know my grandparents grew up in a sort of familial household, uh, but just little cultural things that are really sometimes shocking to people who come from a different culture. So I know a lot of my friends, when they turn 18, their parents are like, all right, you got to either leave or you got to pay board. And that
Yeah.
to anyone who's ethnic, it just
Abhorrent.
doesn't cross the parents' mind
Yeah.
whatsoever. If anything, they're like, no, stay here till you can afford a house.
Yeah.
But
That's
I
so
wonder,
true.
because rents are now, and in major cities, rent is far more expensive, and as is home ownership. I wonder if that culturally will change. Just
Yeah.
because there's no choice, you have to stay at home till you can afford to move out.
Mm.
So just little things like that, very interesting, because that just does not happen in ethnic families. Maybe by second, third generation, they become more westernized, but there's a lot of there's a sense of duty that often can be quite debilitating for the children. But there is this, okay, you have to reach a certain level of status in your career or through your academic studies, because otherwise you're bringing shame to the family, and that
Mm.
doesn't seem to be the case. That seems to be more the case that, okay, the way you act morally could bring shame to the family.
Yeah.
So if you're, we don't care what you do, but as long as you're a good person, that's more important. Whereas I
Mm.
think in Asian families, it's like, all right, you can be a bit of a bad person, but be a doctor. They're the
At
doctors
the
that were
very
asking you
least.
about the pap smear. Yeah.
Love that.
And it's a Protestant thing as well, because I think Catholic families are also a bit more kinship connected.
Oh, yes. 100%. Yeah. Which I actually I find that quite beautiful. When I dated a super Catholic boy, how I really liked his family events were a lot of fun. Christmas was a big deal. But what I didn't like was if he weren't there at 9 o'clock on a Sunday to go to church, all hell would
Hmm.
come. I shouldn't say hell, but shit would go down.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a huge sense of sharing things with your loved ones, looking after each other. So there's a lot of beauty to it. But I would
Just a lot of
just
pressure
really,
that comes with
yeah,
it.
a lot of pressure. And I would struggle so much in my romantic relationship, being like, I need to consider the input of my in laws or my parents. Or if they don't like someone, then a lot of people are like, if my mum doesn't approve of you, that's it. Or my dad doesn't approve. If you don't get my dad's yes to marriage, then it's over. I asked Adrian, I was like, did you ask my dad if you could marry me? Like, and he was like, no, I just told him, hey, I'm proposing to Eliza. That was it. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know how many fathers of
Yeah.
the boomer or Gen X generation would still want that.
Yeah,
But
I was like, you shouldn't. I'm a feminist.
it's interesting how much, I mean, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but how much just the Protestant Reformation changed the culture that even today there's ramifications for that, because Protestantism was all about an individual relationship with God. And so it sort of set the tone for liberalism and individualism, and many of the richest countries today have Protestant roots, especially America.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very, very interesting, but that would be another podcast. Do you have any concluding thoughts? Any final say? Any final list of what you should be prioritizing?
I would say that I feel like in this podcast, I was very much just talking from my own personal views and not in a therapeutic manner. So nothing I say should be taken as advice, aside from the suicidal talk, of course. But anything about like whether or not you should prioritize this relationship above the other, those are just my personal thoughts and not advice. So what works best for you is, of course, going to work best for you, but make sure you're on the same page as your partner. I think that's going to be the best all be all, and consider it being a screening question in your early relationships as well, finding if that's something that you agree on or have shared values on what gets prioritized or who gets prioritized.
Love it.
You?
I think you summed it up perfectly.
Good.
And that's great. I think you should always prioritize work. That should be number one. Work and the nation.
And the nation.
The nation should be number one. And then your football team. And then children should be last. That's my
last.
opinion. All right.
Well said.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening and or watching. Make sure you subscribe to us. YouTube channel is youtube.com/@sexsalespodcast. We have a TikTok and Instagram as well. And share the podcast with someone who you think it may resonate with. We will see you next week. Thanks, guys.
See you next week.